The moment I stepped through the glass doors of the Ashford residence, I knew I had just made either the smartest decision of my life or the worst mistake imaginable. Eleanor Ashford's smile froze the instant she saw me. It wasn't openly hostile, not yet, but her eyes moved slowly from my plain cream dress to my modest heels, lingering long enough to calculate exactly how little value I must bring into her world. She leaned toward her son, my fiancé Nathan, and whispered something she clearly believed I couldn't hear. She looks like she's here to serve dinner, not attend it. And in that second, I understood everything about the evening ahead. My name is Iris Bennett. I'm 31 years old, and for the past year, I have been hiding a truth from the man who asked me to marry him. Nathan believes I live paycheck to paycheck, a quiet project coordinator working in a tech company, someone practical, simple, ordinary. What he doesn't know is that I earn more in a month than most people around this table make in a year. I'm a senior systems architect for one of the fastest-growing technology firms in Northern California. I've led international development teams, hold patents under my name, and own company shares worth more than the luxury cars parked outside tonight. I never lied to Nathan. When we met at a bookstore cafe 13 months ago, he asked what I did for work. I told him I worked in tech. He assumed I organized schedules and handled logistics. I let him believe it, because years ago, my grandmother taught me something I could never forget. After my parents died, she raised me in a small, quiet home. She lived modestly, wore simple clothes, and never spoke about money. Only after she passed away did I learn she had built a successful investment company and chosen a simple life on purpose. In the letter she left me, she wrote, "A person shows you who they really are when they think you have nothing they need." So when Nathan invited me to meet his family, when he warned me his mother valued reputation above everything, I made a decision. I would arrive exactly as they expected, quiet, ordinary, forgettable. And I would watch how they treated someone they believed was beneath them. What I didn't know was that I wasn't the only one hiding something that night. Before dinner ended, I would learn that I wasn't being welcomed into a family at all. I was being positioned. And the role they had chosen for me was temporary. The Ashford residence stood at the end of a quiet hillside road overlooking the city, its wide glass walls glowing softly against the evening sky. From a distance, the house looked less like a home and more like a statement. Modern architecture designed to impress before anyone even stepped inside. I slowed my car as the gates opened automatically. For a brief moment, I considered turning around. Not because I was intimidated by wealth. I had spent years working alongside people far richer than the Ashfords. Boardrooms, investor dinners, international conferences. None of that frightened me. What unsettled me was something else entirely. I cared what Nathan's family thought. That realization surprised me more than the house itself. I checked my reflection in the rearview mirror. My hair was tied back simply. Minimal makeup, small pearl earrings. The cream dress I had chosen carefully. Elegant enough to be respectful, plain enough to confirm every assumption they were likely to make about me. I looked exactly like someone who didn't belong here. Perfect. The driveway curved past sculpted gardens and a fountain illuminated by soft lights. Luxury cars lined one side, each more expensive than the last. My modest sedan felt almost invisible among them, which suited my purpose. Nathan was already waiting outside when I parked. He waved as I stepped out, his smile warm and familiar. The same smile that had made me trust him months ago when we first met over shared coffee and quiet conversation. "You made it," he said, pulling me into a quick hug. His relief felt genuine. "I wouldn't miss meeting your family," I replied. But as he stepped back, his eyes flickered briefly over my outfit. The expression lasted less than a second, hesitation, maybe even embarrassment, before disappearing behind affection. Most people wouldn't have noticed. I did. "You look nice," he added quickly. Nice. Not beautiful, not stunning. Safe. Before I could respond, the front doors opened. Eleanor Ashford stood framed by warm light, perfectly composed, her posture straight and elegant in a way that suggested lifelong practice. Diamonds caught the light at her throat, subtle but intentionally noticeable. Her gaze moved over me slowly, measured, calculated. "Iris," she said, offering her hand. Her smile was polite, but it never reached her eyes. "Welcome." Her handshake lasted barely a second. Inside, the house felt immaculate. Marble floors, minimalist art, furniture chosen more for appearance than comfort. Everything was pristine, untouched, as if real life happened somewhere else. Nathan guided me forward. "Mom, you remember I told you Iris works in tech?" "Yes," Eleanor replied smoothly. "Nathan mentioned." A tall man rose from the sitting area nearby, adjusting his jacket as he approached. "My husband, Victor," Eleanor said. Victor Ashford shook my hand firmly. Unlike Eleanor, he studied my face rather than my clothes. "Good to meet you," he said. "Nathan seems happy." The comment felt genuine and unexpectedly kind. Before I could answer, footsteps echoed behind us. A woman entered while checking her phone, her tailored dress sharp and flawless. She barely looked up as Eleanor spoke. "My daughter, Camille." Camille glanced at me briefly. "Hi." Not unfriendly, not welcoming either, simply indifferent. Nathan cleared his throat. "Dinner's almost ready." We walked toward the dining area, passing a long hallway lined with photographs. Charity events, award ceremonies, vacations in places I recognized from business travel. And in several photos, Nathan stood beside a striking woman I had never seen before. Elegant, confident, perfectly suited to this world. I slowed unconsciously. Eleanor noticed immediately. "Oh," she said lightly, following my gaze. "That's Olivia, a close family friend." The explanation sounded rehearsed. Something tightened faintly in my chest, though I smiled politely and continued walking. The dining room doors opened, revealing a long table set beneath suspended glass lights. Silverware gleamed in precise alignment, more utensils than any normal dinner required. I took my seat carefully, folding my hands in my lap. Across from me, Eleanor watched with quiet interest. I felt it then, unmistakable and immediate. This dinner wasn't about getting to know me. It was about deciding whether I deserved to exist in their world. Nathan reached for my hand beneath the table, squeezing gently as if sensing my tension. I squeezed back. But somewhere deep inside, a small voice whispered something I didn't want to admit yet. Sometimes the moment you hope to belong is the moment someone else begins deciding where you don't. Dinner began with quiet precision. A server appeared almost soundlessly, placing the first course in front of each of us. The soup was arranged so carefully it barely looked edible, a delicate swirl of color floating in a perfectly white bowl. Everything about the setting felt intentional. The lighting, the seating arrangement, even the pauses between movements. I waited half a second before lifting my spoon, following Nathan's lead. Not because I didn't know formal dining etiquette, because tonight I was observing. Eleanor noticed anyway. "I hope you're comfortable," she said, her tone smooth but edged with something sharper. Not everyone is used to formal evenings. I smiled politely. "It's lovely." Camille let out a faint laugh into her glass. "Mom worries people feel intimidated." The word people lingered in the air. Nathan shifted beside me. "Iris travels a lot for work," he added quickly. "Oh?" Eleanor said, interest flickering briefly. "Business travel." "Sometimes," I answered carefully. "What exactly do you do in technology?" she asked. The question sounded casual, but her eyes sharpened slightly. "I coordinate development projects," I said truthfully. Eleanor nodded, clearly satisfied. Organization is an important skill. Every successful company depends on dependable support roles. Support. Behind the scenes. I took another sip of soup, letting the comment pass without correction. Victor changed the subject briefly, asking about traffic downtown, but Eleanor returned quickly to safer territory. "My background." "And your family?" she asked. "My grandmother raised me," I said. "She passed away a few years ago." A brief pause followed. "How unfortunate," Eleanor replied. "Growing up without strong guidance must have been difficult." The statement landed softly but carried weight. "My grandmother was strong enough for both roles," I said calmly. Camille tilted her head. "What did she do?" "She ran small businesses." Technically true. Camille lost interest immediately, turning her attention back to her phone resting beside her plate. Eleanor's posture relaxed, as though a quiet concern had just been resolved. Category assigned. Conversation drifted toward the Ashford Company. Expansion projects, partnerships, investment opportunities. They spoke freely. assuming I wouldn't follow the details. I listened carefully. Numbers slipped into conversation unintentionally. Supply delays, restructuring, timelines that didn't quite align with success. Nothing obvious, but enough to suggest pressure beneath the polished surface. Nathan barely contributed. He laughed when expected, nodded when addressed, but avoided offering opinions. I noticed how often he glanced at his mother before speaking. Approval mattered here. Halfway through dinner, Camille set down her fork. "I ran into Olivia last week," she said casually. Nathan froze almost imperceptibly. Eleanor smiled faintly. "She's doing wonderfully." Camille nodded. Her family's investment group just expanded again. Everyone assumed she and Nathan would eventually reconnect. The words hung between us. I kept my expression neutral. Nathan cleared his throat. "That was a long time ago." Eleanor turned toward me. "Olivia and Nathan dated for several years. She understands our world very well." "Our world." I smiled politely. "She sounds impressive." Camille blinked, clearly expecting discomfort. "She is," Eleanor said. "Compatibility matters more than feelings in the long run." Victor shifted slightly. "Eleanor, I'm only speaking generally," she said smoothly. Nathan squeezed my hand beneath the table. Apology or reassurance, I couldn't tell. Dessert arrived shortly after, something delicate and expensive that no one seemed particularly interested in eating. Conversation softened, but the underlying evaluation remained. Every question felt like a measurement, every smile like a conclusion already reached. I realized then that Eleanor wasn't trying to insult me openly. She was reminding Nathan of alternatives. As coffee was served, Victor asked how Nathan and I had met. "A bookstore cafe," I said. Nathan smiled genuinely for the first time that evening. "She corrected me when I picked the wrong novel." Victor laughed. Camille smiled faintly. Even Eleanor's expression softened for a moment. But it didn't last. "Well," she said, setting down her cup, "first impressions are important. Families must think long-term." The statement wasn't directed at me. It was directed through me. Nathan remained silent. And that silence hurt more than any comment. Because I suddenly understood something unsettling. This dinner wasn't meant to welcome me. It was meant to test whether I would quietly accept being measured. As Eleanor lifted her glass for a polite toast, my grandmother's words echoed again in my mind. "A person shows you who they are when they believe you cannot change their future." I smiled and raised my glass with the others. But somewhere deep inside, I began to wonder whether I was the only one being evaluated tonight, or the only one who didn't yet know the rules of the game. Coffee moved the evening into a quieter rhythm. The dining table was cleared with silent efficiency, while Eleanor suggested we continue in the sitting room. Soft music played somewhere in the background, blending with the low murmur of conversation. Anyone looking in from outside would have seen a perfect family gathering, relaxed, elegant, effortless. But beneath the calm, something felt unfinished. Nathan drifted toward his father near the windows, discussing business in lowered voices. Camille stepped outside to take a call, heels clicking sharply against the marble floor. Eleanor excused herself to check on something with the staff. Within seconds, the room felt larger, quieter. I stood, smoothing my dress. "I'm going to find the restroom," I told Nathan. He nodded absently, still focused on his father. "Down the hallway, second door." I walked slowly through the long corridor, passing framed photographs again. Charity galas, award ceremonies, vacations in Monaco, Aspen, Lake Como, and Olivia appeared again and again beside Nathan, smiling, confident, perfectly aligned with the life surrounding me. The house felt colder away from conversation. I found the restroom easily, but as I stepped back into the hallway afterward, voices drifted from a partially closed door nearby. Eleanor's voice, sharper now, unfiltered. "We can't let this continue much longer." I froze. Camille answered, her tone impatient. "I told you this would happen. He gets attached too easily." They were talking about Nathan, about me. Every instinct told me to walk away. Instead, I stayed still. "The timing couldn't be worse," Eleanor continued. "The Reynolds partnership is already fragile." Reynolds, Olivia's family name. Camille sighed. "Then we move forward with the plan. He proposes. Public commitment keeps appearances stable until negotiations finish." My heartbeat slowed, oddly calm. "And afterward?" Camille asked. Eleanor didn't hesitate. "We end it." The words landed without emotion, spoken like a scheduling decision. "We'll find an appropriate reason," she added. "Background differences, lifestyle incompatibility, something discreet." I felt the air leave my lungs. "She seems harmless," Camille said. "Honestly, she looks grateful just to be here." A quiet laugh followed. "A temporary solution," Eleanor agreed. "A placeholder." The word echoed inside my chest. Placeholder? They weren't worried about whether I belonged. They had already decided I didn't. They were simply waiting for the right moment to remove me. "And Nathan?" Camille asked. "He'll understand," Eleanor replied calmly. "He always does." Silence followed, the kind that ends conversations rather than pauses them. I stepped back carefully, forcing myself to move before they opened the door. Each step down the hallway felt unreal, as if I were watching someone else walk in my place. Inside the restroom, I gripped the edge of the sink and stared at my reflection. Same calm face, same simple dress, but now I understood why every question at dinner had felt rehearsed. They weren't judging me. They were managing me. For a moment, hurt rose unexpectedly. Not because of Eleanor or Camille, but because of Nathan. Had he known? Or was he simply too accustomed to letting decisions be made around him? I turned on the faucet, letting cold water run over my wrists. My grandmother's voice surfaced gently in my memory. "When someone underestimates you, listen carefully. They reveal their strategy." I dried my hands slowly, breathing evenly until my expression softened again. No one in that house would see what I had just heard reflected on my face. Because suddenly, everything was clearer. The dinner wasn't the test. The engagement would be. And for the first time that night, I realized I had a choice. Walk away quietly, or stay long enough to understand the entire truth. I opened the door and walked back toward the sitting room. Nathan looked up immediately, smiling when he saw me. "You okay?" he asked. "I'm fine," I said gently, taking my seat beside him. Across the room, Eleanor returned moments later, composed once again, her polite smile perfectly restored. She believed her plan was invisible. She believed I was unaware, and I smiled back just as warmly. If you've ever stayed silent in a moment when speaking would have changed everything, you already understand why I said nothing. When I sat back down beside Nathan, the conversation resumed as if nothing had happened. Victor was describing a recent business conference. Camille scrolled casually through her phone. Eleanor poured fresh coffee with graceful precision, her expression calm and unreadable. The same woman who only minutes earlier had discussed ending my relationship like a minor inconvenience. If I hadn't heard it myself, I might have believed the warmth in her smile. Nathan leaned closer. "Everything okay?" he asked quietly. I nodded, just needed a minute. He relaxed immediately, satisfied with the answer. That was the first moment I truly understood something about him. Nathan didn't look deeper when things seemed peaceful. He accepted comfort at face value, trusting the surface because questioning it would create conflict. And conflict didn't belong in this house. Eleanor turned toward me again. "I hope you're enjoying the evening, Iris." "I am," I said honestly. Because now I was no longer nervous. I was observing. The rest of the conversation flowed easily. Travel plans, charity events, business acquaintances. Eleanor spoke about reputation often, though never directly. Words like legacy, stability, and long-term compatibility appeared repeatedly, threaded carefully into casual discussion. Each one felt less like conversation and more like instruction directed at Nathan. Victor occasionally attempted to lighten the tone, asking about my hobbies or favorite places to visit. Unlike Eleanor, he seemed genuinely curious, though years of habit kept him from challenging her openly. Camille watched everything with quiet amusement, as if she already knew how the story would end. I responded politely, smiling when expected, laughing softly at harmless jokes. On the outside, nothing about me suggested I had just learned I was temporary. Inside, something had shifted permanently. I began noticing details I had missed before. How Nathan waited for Eleanor's approval before agreeing to plans. How Camille dismissed topics that didn't interest her without apology. How Eleanor guided conversations back toward control whenever they drifted away. This wasn't simply a wealthy family. It was a system. And everyone inside it already knew their role. Eventually, Victor stood, stretching slightly. "Another drink?" Nathan followed him toward the bar area. Camille stepped outside again, leaving Eleanor and me alone for the first time that evening. She studied me thoughtfully. "You're very quiet," she said. "I like listening," I replied. "A useful trait," she said, "especially when entering a new environment." The meaning was clear. I tilted my head slightly. "Every environment has its own rules." Eleanor smiled faintly, clearly pleased. "Yes," she said, "and people who adapt tend to do well. Adapt, adjust, accept." Her message wasn't cruel. It was instructional. She believed she was helping me understand my place. Nathan returned moments later, handing me a drink. His smile softened when our eyes met, genuine affection warming his expression. For a brief second, doubt flickered through me. Maybe he didn't know. Maybe he truly believed everything was unfolding naturally. That possibility hurt more than manipulation ever could. As the evening drew toward its end, coats were brought and polite goodbyes exchanged. Eleanor kissed Nathan's cheek before turning to me. "It was lovely meeting you properly," she said. "Family evenings can feel overwhelming at first." "I appreciate the invitation," I replied. Camille added casually, "You handled yourself well." I wasn't sure whether she meant it as praise or surprise. Outside, cool night air wrapped around us as Nathan walked me to my car. "I think that went really well," he said, clearly relieved. I looked at him under the driveway lights. He seemed happy, hopeful, completely unaware of the conversation I had overheard. "Did it?" I asked gently. "Yeah," he said, "my mom just needs time." Time. The word echoed differently now. He leaned in, kissing me softly. Familiar, comfortable, almost convincing. For a moment, I allowed myself to remember why I had fallen for him. The easy laughter, the kindness, the way he once listened without judgment. Then I remembered the word placeholder. As I started the engine, Nathan waved from the driveway, smiling as the gate slowly closed behind me. I drove down the long road in silence, city lights appearing below like scattered stars. I had arrived tonight hoping to be accepted. Instead, I had learned the truth. And truth changed everything. By the time I reached the main road, one decision had already formed clearly in my mind. I wasn't going to confront them. Not yet, because walking away now would only confirm what they believed about me. If they wanted me to play a role, I would, just not the one they expected. The morning after dinner felt strangely quiet. Sunlight filtered through my apartment windows, landing across the small kitchen table where my laptop already waited. Outside, the city moved as it always did. Commuters rushing, coffee shops opening, lives continuing untouched by the realization that had quietly reshaped mine. For several minutes, I simply sat there, hands wrapped around a mug that had long gone warm. Placeholder. The word no longer hurt the way it had the night before. Now it felt like information, and information could be used. I opened my laptop. Years of working in systems architecture had trained my mind to respond to uncertainty in one way: gather data. When something didn't make sense, you didn't react emotionally. You traced patterns until structure appeared. The Ashford family ran Ashford Holdings, a company with an impressive public reputation, elegant branding, consistent growth headlines, charity partnerships that appeared regularly in business magazines. On the surface, everything looked stable, but systems rarely fail without leaving clues. I began with public filings, quarterly summaries, investment announcements, expansion reports. Numbers scrolled across my screen while I built a simple comparison model, cross-referencing timelines mentioned casually during dinner. It didn't take long before inconsistencies appeared. Rapid expansion 3 years earlier, followed by sudden restructuring. Loans refinanced sooner than expected. Supplier disputes quietly settled. Not collapse. Pressure. I leaned back slowly. Eleanor's urgency suddenly made perfect sense. The Reynolds partnership, Olivia's family, wasn't about prestige. It was survival. Without outside investment, Ashford Holdings would struggle to maintain its current scale, which meant Nathan's future marriage wasn't just personal. It was strategic. My phone buzzed beside the keyboard. "Nathan, good morning. Still thinking about last night. I'm glad you came." I stared at the message longer than necessary. Once, it would have made me smile. Now it felt complicated. Affection mixed with uncertainty. I replied carefully. "Busy morning, but I'm glad too." 3 dots appeared instantly, then disappeared. I returned to the data. As I dug deeper, another pattern began forming. Small financial movements tied repeatedly to internal executive expenses. Nothing illegal at first glance, just irregular. Amounts slightly higher than expected. Travel doesn't quite align with company performance periods. One name appeared often, Camille Ashford. I frowned slightly, opening additional reports. Expense reimbursements increasing yearly despite declining profit margins. Promotional spending tied to events that produce little measurable return. Individually insignificant. Together, questionable. I wasn't searching for wrongdoing, but systems revealed imbalance whether you wanted them to or not. Hours passed unnoticed. Coffee cooled beside me as folders filled with notes and screenshots. The more I learned, the clearer the picture became. The Ashfords weren't powerful architects controlling the future. They were reacting to a slow tightening around them. Desperation explained far more than arrogance ever could. Around noon, I closed my laptop and stared out the window. If I walked away now, none of this would matter. I could block Nathan's number, return to work, forget the estate, the dinner, the carefully hidden plan. Life would return to normal. So why wasn't I doing that? The answer came quietly. Because this wasn't about revenge. It was about understanding. They had decided who I was without knowing me, and Nathan, whether knowingly or not, had allowed it. My grandmother used to say clarity was a gift, even when it arrived painfully. I reopened the laptop. If they believed I was harmless, invisible, temporary, then they wouldn't see me watching. An observation created advantage. By late afternoon, one truth stood out clearly among the numbers. The Ashford family depended on appearances more than stability. Reputation was their foundation, which meant reputation was also their weakest point. I closed the final file and leaned back, exhaling slowly. The engagement Eleanor planned wasn't just a celebration. It was leverage. And suddenly I understood why she needed everything to appear perfect. Outside, clouds drifted across the sky, casting shifting shadows across the city. For the first time since the dinner, I felt calm. Not because the situation was better, but because I finally understood the game being played. And once you understand the rules, you can decide how the story ends. The next few weeks passed with an unsettling sense of normalcy. Nathan called every morning like he always had. We met for dinner, watched movies, talked about work, and laughed at small things that once made everything feel easy between us. On the surface, nothing had changed. But once you learn the truth about a system, you begin noticing how every piece moves within it. And I had started seeing Nathan differently. Not cruel, not calculating, just careful. One evening, we met at a quiet restaurant overlooking the river, a place we used to choose because no one there cared who you were or what you owned. Rain pressed softly against the windows, turning city lights into blurred reflections. "You've been distracted lately," Nathan said halfway through dinner. I looked up. "Have I?" "A little," he admitted. "Did my mom make you uncomfortable?" The question almost felt sincere. "She was welcoming," I said carefully. Nathan exhaled, relieved. "She just worries about how things look. Appearances again." "And you?" I asked. "Do appearances matter to you?" He hesitated before answering. "In my world, they kind of have to. Honest, quietly revealing." He reached across the table, taking my hand. "But being with you feels different. Simple." Simple. The word landed heavier this time. I smiled faintly, but inside something shifted. He didn't mean it as an insult. To him, simplicity meant peace, escape from expectations. But simplicity also meant he had never truly tried to understand me beyond what comforted him. Later, as we walked toward the parking lot, his phone vibrated. He glanced down quickly, turning the screen away almost immediately. Work message, maybe. Except his expression softened in a way work rarely caused. "Everything okay?" I asked. "Yeah," he said quickly. "Just family stuff." He slipped the phone into his pocket without replying. The lie was small, almost gentle, and that made it harder to confront. A few nights later, I told him I would be working late. Instead, I drove home earlier than expected, taking a route past the waterfront district. That's when I saw him. Nathan sat inside a softly lit restaurant, visible through tall windows. Across from him sat a woman I recognized instantly from the photographs in the Ashford hallway. Olivia Reynolds. She leaned forward while speaking, smiling easily. Nathan laughed. Relaxed, open, familiar in a way I hadn't seen since before meeting his family. At one point, he reached across the table, touching her hand. The gesture was natural, unrehearsed. I stayed in my car longer than I meant to, rain tapping steadily against the windshield. Strangely, I didn't feel shock. Only confirmation. I lifted my phone and took one photograph through the glass. Not out of anger, out of clarity, because doubt disappears when proof exists. Driving home afterward, I realized something important. Nathan wasn't living two lives because he wanted to hurt anyone. He was trying to keep everyone satisfied. His family, Olivia, me, hoping reality would somehow resolve itself without forcing him to choose. And that kind of weakness could wound deeper than intentional betrayal. That night he called. "Long day," he said softly. "I miss you." I closed my eyes briefly before answering. "Me too." We talked about ordinary things, deadlines, weekend plans, trivial details that once felt meaningful. Now they sounded distant, like echoes of a version of us that no longer existed. Before hanging up, he added, "I'm really glad you're in my life, Iris." I believed he meant it. That was the hardest part. After the call ended, I sat quietly in my apartment, the photograph still open on my screen. Rain continued falling outside, steady and patient. My grandmother used to say, "Love doesn't disappear in one moment. It fades the instant you begin seeing someone clearly." And looking at Nathan beside Olivia, I finally understood who he truly was. Not a villain, not a hero, just someone who would never risk disappointing his world, even if it meant quietly losing me. The realization hurt, but beneath the pain, something stronger began forming: acceptance. Because for the first time since meeting his family, I wasn't wondering whether I belonged with them anymore. I was deciding what I would do next. Pain changes shape after a while. At first it feels sharp, immediate, impossible to ignore. But once understanding replaces confusion, pain becomes quieter, less like a wound and more like clarity settling into place. That was how the following days felt. I stopped waiting for Nathan to explain things I already understood. I stopped searching for hidden meanings in his messages. Instead, I watched calmly as events moved exactly the way Eleanor had planned. And slowly, I began planning too. The engagement party announcement came 3 days later. Nathan called, excitement unmistakable in his voice. "Mom wants to host something big," he said. "Friends, business partners, everyone important. She thinks it'll help bring everyone together." Bring everyone together. I almost admired the phrasing. "That sounds memorable," I replied. "She really likes you," he added quickly. I didn't correct him. After the call ended, I opened my laptop again, not to search for answers this time, but to organize what I already knew. Financial pressure, strategic alliances, Olivia's family positioned as investors, Camille's irregular spending patterns quietly draining resources. Individually, these were secrets. Together, they formed leverage. I wasn't interested in revenge. Anger had already faded into something steadier, truth. And truth, when revealed at the right moment, didn't need exaggeration. It simply needed an audience. Later that week, I received a message from Richard Hale, the older business associate who had attended the dinner. We had exchanged brief pleasantries that night, nothing more. But his message was direct. "I believe you've noticed more than most people would." We met at a small cafe downtown the next morning. Richard arrived early, silver hair neat, expression thoughtful. He didn't waste time with small talk. "The Ashfords underestimate people," he said calmly. "It's a habit that has cost them before." I listened quietly. "They've pushed business partners too far over the years," he continued. "Nothing illegal, just enough arrogance to create enemies." He studied my reaction carefully. "You heard something that night, didn't you?" I met his gaze. "Yes." He nodded once, unsurprised. When I mentioned inconsistencies in company finances, his eyebrows lifted slightly. "You see systems clearly," he said. "That's rare." "I see patterns," I replied. Richard leaned back. "If what you suspect is correct, the timing of this engagement party is unfortunate for them." The idea settled fully then, not confrontation. Revelation. A quiet shift where appearances could no longer protect reality. Driving home afterward, I felt calm in a way I hadn't since before meeting Nathan's family. For weeks I had reacted, listening, processing, adapting. Now I was choosing direction. That evening, Nathan called again, energized. "You're going to love this party," he said. "Mom invited investors, industry people, everyone who matters. Everyone who matters." I wondered how differently he would define that phrase soon. "I'll be there," I said softly. After we hung up, I stood in front of my closet for a long moment. Rows of simple clothes filled most of the space. The version of myself I had chosen to show for the past year. But behind them hung another part of my life. Tailored dresses, designer pieces worn at conferences and executive events. The identity I had hidden deliberately. For 13 months, I had allowed people to underestimate me. Soon I would stop. My grandmother used to say timing was the difference between conflict and transformation. Speak too early and people dismiss you. Speak at the right moment and they cannot ignore you. The engagement party would be that moment. I closed the closet slowly, already knowing which dress I would wear. Outside, evening lights flickered on across the city, one window after another. Somewhere across town, Eleanor Ashford was likely finalizing guest lists, confident she controlled every detail of the coming night. She believed she was preparing a celebration. She didn't realize she was preparing a stage. And if you've ever waited quietly while someone underestimated you, knowing the truth would eventually speak for itself, you already understand why patience can be the strongest decision of all. The Ashford estate looked transformed the night of the engagement party. Soft white lights stretched across the lawn like falling stars, illuminating glass tables and carefully arranged flowers. A live quartet played near the fountain, their music drifting through warm evening air while guests moved gracefully between conversations. From a distance, it looked perfect. Exactly the image Eleanor Ashford wanted the world to see. Luxury cars lined the long driveway, engines humming quietly as valets hurried from one arrival to the next. Laughter carried across the garden, polished, practiced, belonging to people accustomed to being seen. I parked near the end of the line. My car stood out immediately, modest among polished imports and custom vehicles. The valet hesitated slightly when I handed him the keys, his expression polite but confused. I smiled anyway. Tonight wasn't about fitting in. It was about being seen clearly for the first time. As I walked toward the entrance, I felt surprisingly calm. Weeks earlier, I would have been nervous, worried about approval, anxious about impressions. Now the anxiety was gone, replaced by something steadier, certainty. Inside the main tent, conversation slowed as I entered. Not dramatically, just enough to be noticed. I understood why immediately. Tonight, I wasn't wearing the simple clothes they expected. The midnight blue gown fit perfectly, tailored years ago for a technology awards gala. My hair fell loosely over my shoulders, and the diamond pendant my grandmother left me rested lightly at my collarbone. Understated but unmistakable to anyone familiar with real value. I wasn't pretending anymore. I looked like myself. Whispers moved quietly through the crowd as recognition tried to catch up with expectation. Nathan spotted me first. His smile appeared automatically, then faltered. "Iris?" he said, walking toward me. "You look incredible." "Thank you," I replied gently. His eyes moved from my dress to the pendant, confusion growing. He opened his mouth as if to ask something, then stopped when Victor approached. Victor paused mid-step, clearly surprised. Unlike his wife, he didn't hide it. "You look wonderful tonight," he said sincerely. "I appreciate that." Across the tent, Eleanor turned. The change in her expression unfolded slowly. Recognition, disbelief, calculation. Her gaze lingered on details she understood too well. Craftsmanship, subtle luxury, confidence that couldn't be borrowed. For the first time since meeting her, she looked uncertain. She approached with controlled grace. "Iris," she said, voice perfectly steady, "what a lovely surprise." "I thought tonight deserved something special," I answered. Camille appeared beside her moments later, eyes narrowing slightly. "That dress," she said sweetly. "Is it new?" "No," I said calmly. "I've had it for years." I added the designer's name softly. Camille's smile faltered for a fraction of a second before returning. Nathan looked between us, completely lost. Guests nearby had begun whispering more openly now. A woman from an investment firm studied my pendant with open curiosity. Two executives exchanged quiet comments after overhearing my introduction to another guest. The narrative was shifting, and Eleanor felt it. "Nathan," she said quickly, "your father needs you." He hesitated but followed automatically. I watched him go, realizing how instinctively he responded to her direction. Richard Hale appeared beside me moments later, offering a subtle nod. "Timing," he murmured. "Matters," I replied. Across the lawn, conversations grew louder, speculation spreading gently through the crowd. People were checking phones, connecting names, placing pieces together. They were beginning to realize I didn't match the story they had been told. Exactly as intended. Nathan returned a few minutes later, tension visible now. "Can we talk privately?" he asked quietly. "Later," I said. "We should greet your guests." I slipped my arm through his and guided him toward a group of business partners near the center of the tent. Introductions began. Each conversation shifted the atmosphere slightly. Recognition dawning as company names surfaced, professional circles overlapped, and assumptions quietly collapsed. Nathan's confusion deepened with every exchange. Behind him, Eleanor watched carefully, composure tightening. For the first time that evening, she wasn't directing the room. She was reacting to it. Music softened as staff prepared the stage for speeches. Glasses were refilled, guests gathered closer, sensing an important moment approaching. Eleanor moved toward the microphone, reclaiming control with practiced confidence. She still believed the evening belonged to her. As I accepted a glass of champagne and waited, one thought settled calmly in my mind. She was right. It did belong to her, just not in the way she expected. The music softened as guests slowly gathered closer to the stage. A quiet shift passed through the crowd, the subtle instinct people have when something important is about to happen. Conversations lowered into whispers. Glasses were set aside. Attention turned naturally toward Eleanor Ashford as she stepped forward, confident and composed beneath the warm lights. She looked entirely in control again. For a moment, watching her there, I almost admired her. Eleanor understood presentation better than anyone in the room. Every movement was measured, every smile calculated to project stability and success. If appearances alone determined reality, she would have already won. Nathan stood beside me, tense now, his earlier excitement replaced by confusion he could no longer hide. "Everyone keeps looking at you," he murmured. I gave a small smile. People notice change. He studied me carefully, searching for answers I wasn't ready to give yet. On stage, Eleanor lifted the microphone. "Thank you all for joining us tonight," she began warmly. "Family and partnership have always been at the heart of everything the Ashfords have built." Polite applause followed. She spoke gracefully about legacy, growth, and shared futures, words designed not only for celebration but reassurance. Investors listened closely. Business partners nodded along. This was more than an engagement party. It was a public declaration that the Ashford family remained strong. Victor watched quietly from the side, pride mixed with fatigue. Camille stood near the bar, arms crossed, scanning the crowd as if measuring reactions. I noticed several guests glancing toward me again. The whispers hadn't stopped. Nathan leaned closer. "I feel like I missed something," he said softly. "You didn't," I replied. "Not yet." Eleanor continued speaking, her tone brightening as she transitioned toward the evening's purpose. "Tonight," she said, "we celebrate not only family, but the beginning of a beautiful future for my son." She turned slightly toward us. Nathan straightened instinctively. "And the wonderful woman he has chosen." Applause rose again as attention shifted fully toward me. Nathan squeezed my hand, nervous now. "You okay?" I nodded. Inside, everything felt remarkably calm. Weeks earlier, this moment would have terrified me. I would have worried about saying the right thing, about earning approval, about fitting into expectations carefully constructed around me. Now I understood something different. Approval had never been the goal. Truth was. Eleanor smiled warmly as she extended her hand toward me. "Iris, dear, would you come join us?" Every eye followed as I walked toward the stage. The sound of my heels against the floor seemed louder than it should have been, echoing through the quiet tent. Faces blurred slightly together. Investors, friends, strangers, all waiting for a predictable speech filled with gratitude and promises. Nathan joined me, his hand brushing mine uncertainly. "What's going on?" he whispered. I looked at him gently. You'll understand soon. Eleanor handed me the microphone, her smile perfectly controlled, though tension flickered behind her eyes. Say whatever you like, she said softly. The invitation sounded generous, but I knew she expected something safe. Polite thanks, reassuring words, confirmation that her carefully built image remained intact. I turned toward the crowd. For a brief moment, silence stretched long enough that I could hear the faint sound of wind moving through the trees beyond the tent. I thought about the dinner, the hallway, the word placeholder. I thought about Nathan laughing across a table with Olivia, and about my grandmother's letter, folded carefully in my drawer at home. A person reveals their true character when they believe you cannot change their future. I inhaled slowly. This was the moment Eleanor believed she controlled. The moment Nathan believed would unite everyone. The moment the Ashford family expected their story to be confirmed. Instead, it would become something else entirely. I lifted the microphone slightly, feeling the weight of dozens of expectations resting quietly in the air. No anger remained. No desire to humiliate. Only clarity. Behind me, Eleanor waited, confident she already knew what I would say. Nathan watched anxiously, unaware his life was about to divide into before and after. The crowd leaned closer, and for the first time since arriving that evening, I allowed myself one small, honest thought. Sometimes the most powerful moment isn't when you finally speak. It's the second just before, when everyone still believes they understand the story. I opened my mouth to begin. The microphone felt surprisingly light in my hand. For a moment, I simply looked at the crowd, faces filled with polite anticipation, glasses raised halfway, smiles prepared for a predictable speech about love and gratitude. Eleanor stood beside me, perfectly composed. Nathan waited just behind my shoulder, nervous but hopeful. They were expecting celebration. I took a slow breath. "Thank you," I began softly, "for welcoming me tonight." The audience relaxed immediately. A few guests nodded approvingly, reassured by the familiar tone. "When I first came to this house," I continued, "I chose to present a very simple version of myself." Eleanor's smile flickered slightly. "I wore modest clothes. I spoke carefully about my work. I allowed certain assumptions to exist." A ripple of curiosity moved through the crowd. "My grandmother once told me something I never forgot," I said. "She said people reveal their true character when they believe you have nothing they need." The air shifted. Eleanor's posture stiffened. "I wanted to understand the family I might one day join," I continued calmly, "so I watched. I listened." Nathan frowned slightly behind me. I turned gently toward the audience again. At dinner, I learned how easily someone can be measured by appearance, compared, evaluated, quietly dismissed. Murmurs spread through the tent. "And later that night," I said, voice steady, "I overheard a conversation." Eleanor stepped forward. "Iris!" I raised a hand gently, not confrontational, simply continuing. "I learned that my relationship was never meant to last, that I was meant to be temporary, a public engagement to protect business negotiations." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Nathan's voice broke behind me. "What are you talking about?" I met his eyes briefly. "I heard everything." Silence followed, heavy, undeniable. I turned back to the audience. "I also learned the Ashford company is under significant financial pressure," I said calmly, "and that certain internal decisions may soon attract attention beyond this room." Victor lowered his gaze slowly. Camille's confident posture disappeared, replaced by shock. Eleanor's composure finally cracked. "This is completely inappropriate." "Everything I've said," I replied gently, "is verifiable." The calmness in my voice carried further than anger ever could. I slipped the engagement ring from my finger. The diamond caught the light, brilliant but suddenly small. "I won't be marrying Nathan," I said quietly. Nathan stepped forward, stunned. "Iris, please, we can talk about this." "I gave you chances to be honest," I said softly. "You chose comfort instead." I placed the ring in his hand. "This engagement was never real," I continued, addressing the crowd once more. "But the lesson was," I lifted my chin slightly. "My name is Iris Bennett. I'm a senior systems architect, and I chose to live simply because I wanted to know whether people valued character more than status." No one spoke. They showed me their answer. I set the microphone down. No dramatic gesture, no raised voice, Just truth left standing where appearances once protected everything. As I stepped off the stage, the crowd parted instinctively. Conversations erupted behind me. Confused whispers, urgent questions, reputations shifting in real time. Outside the tent, cool night air filled my lungs. For the first time in weeks, I felt light. Not victorious. Free. Richard Hale joined me near the fountain moments later. "You changed the entire room," he said quietly. "I didn't change anything," I replied. "I just stopped pretending." He nodded, understanding. I walked toward the valet stand, reclaiming my old car while distant voices rose behind me. Eleanor trying to regain control, investors speaking urgently, the perfect evening unraveling piece by piece. As I drove away, the estate lights faded behind me. My phone buzzed once on the passenger seat. Nathan. I didn't read the message. Some endings don't need explanations. At home, I stood by the window watching the city lights stretch endlessly into the distance. Life moved forward, untouched by what had happened. And for the first time, so did I. My grandmother's pendant rested warm against my skin. She had been right. Worth isn't decided by wealth, approval, or belonging to the right room. It's decided the moment you choose yourself. And if this story stayed with you even after it ended, you already know why walking away is sometimes the bravest beginning, and why the next chapter always belongs to you.